Okay, so we talked a couple weeks ago about contracting and the experience, and I've done a lot of contracting, and so I was going to talk about my story. It's interesting. I had actually prepared a set of slides, and then after talking to Alan, we decided, or he made the comment, and he was right on with it, that I was more teaching a class or lecturing rather than telling my story. So I have changed the focus to be a little bit more about my experience and what I've done and how it's worked. So what I want to do is, obviously introduction. I have a passion about contracting. I really found it to be beneficial during my career. I've also had my own business where I had my own clients, versus contracting, talk about that, the issues of the pipeline, and then building and leveraging your contacts. So I started, my contracting actually, it started after I had been doing work on my own. Initially, long ago, I worked for IBM. And after IBM, I went to a CPA firm. And through both of those employment opportunities, I had the chance to create relationships that I was able to take into my own private contracting business. And as a result, I wasn't tied or needing a contracting agency because I had enough business that I was able to do there. Plus, some of the individuals that I knew that had been sales reps at IBM were, pushing some business my way as well. So when I started, I'd been with IBM, then I went to a CPA firm. We didn't particularly see eye to eye. And eventually they decided that we should part ways, but that was after I'd sent a message to the partners telling them that either we're going to do this. I was starting a department, management advisory services department for them. Said either we're going to do this and actually have a consulting department, or if you're not going to be committed to it, then we should just part ways. And about 9 months later, they agreed with me, and they told me to leave. So I went to one of my old IBM customers that I'd actually been doing a little bit of stuff with, and talked to the CFO, and he says, well, I was surprised you lasted as long as you did at the CPA firm, because you're just not cut out for that, and you definitely don't have the mentality to be working at a CPA firm. You're too much of a renegade, you're too much of an outlier. And so what we can do is we've got this desk back here, so you can set up business at that desk. You can use our telephones. I can check into seeing about getting you on our insurance plan, and work here when you're not working someplace else. And so it was a pretty ideal situation. And he gave me a lot of opportunity to just get things rolling. Had a couple of clients that, from the CPA firm as well that I, continued to work with on the side, or, with my business now. But it was funny, the CPA firm, it was like, oh, you just think you can walk out of here and you can just go get work. Well, my last day was Friday, and I started on Monday with my new business. Probably the biggest thing was, just informing in-laws and parents that that I was going to do that. And my biggest hurdle was, telling in-laws, and they said, well, we expected this, we've just been waiting for it to happen. So everybody knew about me, that I was going to be doing something different. And so I got passionate about the contracting side of it, and I really liked it when it was my own. And then as my own business, I made some changes in my life, and it required me to move. And when it didn't require me to move, it just was the best idea was to move. And I moved from Michigan to the West Coast. And when I moved to the West Coast, I didn't have the relationships anymore. So now I had to rely on somebody else to help me come up with the business. Because when you're doing a contracting, somebody has to be feeding that pipeline, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you've got to have things happening. And because I had built-in business, it was a pretty easy thing to do. And when I got to Oregon, that wasn't the same situation. So I ended up going and doing the contracting. So the keeping the pipeline full, you've got two choices. Either you find the work, if it's your own business, or someone else finds the work for you. If you're finding the work yourself, then you have to realize that a portion of your billable time is not going to be billable, because you're going to have to spend that time nurturing relationships and building those relationships. When you have a contracting agency, they're going to be the ones that are out there beating the bush. They're the ones that are going to out there trying to find that work for you and sustain you and keep you going. So ideally, with a good relationship, you can stay busy, and when one ends, they will, within a short period of time, get you into the next role as a contractor. And that, for the most part, worked pretty well. I did have some times where I moved away from the contractors because I thought, well, actually, I had one where I was doing a contract role, and I forget how it just worked out, but I heard that CompUSA was looking for an instructor, and I'd done a lot of Novell stuff, and they were looking for a Novell instructor, and I was actually a certified Novell instructor, and so I started doing contract work and teaching classes for CompUSA on Novell and also Microsoft. And that was an interesting one, because some of the people that would come to class as the supposed system administrators, what we'd find is that even though the organization wanted them to be the system administrator, they really weren't prepared to do it, or with the other tasks that they were doing, they really didn't have time to do it. So I found working for CompUSA, as my contract I was in for my other work wound down, working for CompUSA became my pipeline for finding other clients. And so I actually would find students that were, they'd say, well, we can't do that. We don't have time for that. And so they'd introduce me to their management, and I'd come in, and sure enough, I'd end up with a job working for them. So you've got to have some way to keep that pipeline going, whether it's you finding the work yourself. And the CompUSA was great, because CompUSA basically paid me while I was marketing, or someone else has to find the work for you. And it's important that you build and leverage your contacts, because even if you're working for a contractor, as a contractor, today with LinkedIn, you've got so many ways that you can maintain a relationship and build relationships and contacts that potentially can lead to business. So if you decide that you want to hang out your shingle and do things on your own, you can reach out to these different organizations or these individuals that you've met through other experiences or whatever, or once your contract is done and you moved on to something else, then something comes up and maybe they contact you or you contact them, and you end up going back and working for them directly. That can be an avenue, but also I found situations where I have 6 kids, and so they're involved in sports. And so one of the things that I ran into with the kids involved in sports is meeting other parents. And I was at one of my son's baseball games one time, and I was carrying a book because I like to read historical books, and either biographies or even historical novels or whatever. And one of the moms said something to me about, oh, what's that book you're reading? And I told her, and she says, my husband just really enjoys, reading history books. And so I've got to get the name of it so I can get him that book. Yeah, and I said, fine. And, she took the information. I thought nothing of it. And then she says, when, one of these days, one of these games, he'll be at the game. And so I want to introduce you. And I said, fantastic, be happy to meet him. And so, he shows up at the game and I meet him, and turns out to be he's the chief financial officer for Nike. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, this is kind of cool. And then I had another one of the parents that I knew I was looking for a job, and he worked for Nike as well. And the CFO, he'd given me his card, but, I had his name, but I didn't really, spend a whole lot of time, dwelling on it. And anyway, this other guy, he works for Nike, and he says, well, if you're interested in getting to Nike, I'd be happy to make some introductions for you. And I said, oh yeah. And I've got the name of this guy. And I gave him the CFO's name. And he says, well, you don't need my help. But, it was those relationships and the contacts, and you don't know where they're going to come from. And ultimately it ended up that there was some new things that were going on, and they needed some contractors. And so, they brought me into Nike, and I was able to, get the job. And the nice part is that, they pay you directly. There's no cut that goes to some contract agency. All of it goes to you. And the reality is they end up a whole lot better because they're paying me a good rate, but they would have been paying a far higher rate if they'd gone through some contract agency. So, but you need to really, build and grow those contacts. So, if you meet somebody, you need to get them on your LinkedIn, and you don't, whether that person is high up in the organization or down low in the organization, you never know who they know or who they may have contact with. You may find somebody that, works in a plant, but their, some relative is high up in some organization. And all of a sudden, they're making an introduction for you, and you're able to move into that, that situation and that kind of an opportunity. So it's really, really important that you have your contacts. And